It was the night the world couldn't stop watching. The lights of Las Vegas burned bright, the air electric with anticipation, and millions around the globe were glued to their screens. Two men stood on opposite sides of the octagon, each embodying a distinct world, a clashing ideology, and a rivalry that had transcended the realm of sports to become something far larger. On one side, a brash and flamboyant showman, whose meteoric rise had made him one of the most polarizing figures in mixed martial arts. On the other, a stoic and undefeated warrior, driven not by fame or fortune, but by an unwavering code of honor. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor wasn't just a fight. It was a collision of cultures, philosophies, and personal legacies. And it was about to explode into chaos. The story of Khabib and Conor isn't simply about two fighters trading blows in the cage. It's about everything that happened before and after that unforgettable night. It's a tale of two men whose paths couldn't have been more different. Conor McGregor came from humble beginnings in Ireland, working as a plumber's apprentice before his dream of MMA stardom consumed him. With his razor-sharp wit and a knack for mind games, he became a marketing genius, selling out arenas and breaking pay-per-view records. Every punch he threw and every word he spoke built a persona larger than life, one that made him adored by some and despised by others. Khabib Nurmagomedov, by contrast, was a man of few words. Born in the remote mountains of Dagestan, he was raised in a harsh environment that forged him into a warrior long before he ever stepped into the cage. Wrestling bears as a boy wasn't just a gimmick for viral videos. It was a glimpse into a life defined by discipline and struggle. Khabib didn't need flashy antics or loud declarations. His undefeated record spoke louder than words ever could. To him, fighting wasn't about entertainment. It was about proving his dominance and upholding the values of his people. Their paths to greatness were different, but they both climbed to the summit of the UFC lightweight division, destined to meet in a clash that felt almost fated. The animosity between them simmered long before they ever exchanged punches. Conor's trash talk wasn't just promotional theater, it was deeply personal. He poked at Khabib's culture, his family, and his faith, crossing lines that blurred the boundaries of sportsmanship. Khabib, unflinching and silent, absorbed the insults with a cold, steely resolve, vowing to let his fists do the talking when the time came. But this wasn't just about two fighters anymore. Their feud had spiraled into something much larger, pulling in teammates, fans, and entire nations. The infamous bus incident at UFC 223 was the moment everything reached a boiling point. Conor and his entourage ambushed a bus carrying Khabib and other fighters, hurling objects and smashing windows in a chaotic scene that made headlines worldwide. It was a moment of raw, unfiltered animosity, a preview of the storm that was brewing. When fight night finally arrived, it wasn't just a match, it was a spectacle. The T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas was packed to the rafters, the energy almost suffocating. Fans chanted, booed, and screamed as the fighters made their way to the cage. The intensity so palpable, it felt as though the world had paused for this moment. For Khabib, this was about defending his honor, his family, and everything he stood for. For Conor, it was a chance to reclaim his throne and prove that his larger-than-life persona wasn't just a facade. The stakes couldn't have been higher. As the cage door closed and the first round began, it became clear that this fight was unlike any other. Khabib's relentless grappling and unmatched ground control clashed with Conor's precision striking and calculated movement. Each exchange was a battle of wills, a test of skill and heart that kept fans on the edge of their seats. But what happened inside the octagon was only part of the story. The tension that had built up over years even was about to erupt in a way no one could have predicted. By the fourth round, Khabib secured a rear naked choke, forcing Conor to tap and cementing his place as the undisputed champion. But the drama didn't end with the fight. As the crowd roared, Khabib leapt over the cage, launching himself into Conor's corner and igniting an all-out brawl that spilled into the audience. It was chaos on a scale the UFC had never seen. A moment that blurred the line between sport and spectacle, leaving fans and pundits alike questioning how it had all come to this. But what was it that drove these two men to such extremes? Was it pride, revenge, or something deeper, something rooted in the clash of their worlds, their ideals, and their unyielding desire to be remembered as the greatest? Even now, years after that fateful night, the echoes of their rivalry continue to reverberate through the MMA world. It's a story that has shaped careers, inspired debates, and left a legacy that will be discussed for generations. But the real question is, was it ever truly over? The aftermath of their feud raised questions that remain unanswered. Did either man find closure, or is this rivalry destined to linger, waiting for its next chapter? As we dive deeper into the origins, the build-up, and the fallout of Khabib vs. Conor, we'll uncover the truths behind the headlines and the moments that define this epic clash. This is more than a rivalry. It's a saga that has redefined what it means to compete at the highest level. To understand how Khabib and Conor became the central figures in one of the most captivating rivalries in combat sports history, we have to step back and look at the paths that led them to the fateful night in Las Vegas. These weren't just two fighters. They were two symbols of everything that makes mixed martial arts such a raw and unpredictable spectacle. Their lives, their struggles, and their choices outside the cage shaped the collision that would eventually define their careers. Khabib Nurmagomedov grew up in the rugged mountains of Dagestan, a region known for its warriors and unshakable traditions. From the moment he could walk, his life was built around discipline. His father, a decorated coach and a former military man, trained Khabib alongside other young fighters in a gym that doubled as a family living room. Wrestling was more than a sport in Dagestan. It was a rite of passage, a way to prove one's resilience and earn respect. Khabib's early years weren't defined by luxury or distraction. They were defined by the cold, unyielding reality of survival in a tough environment. Every sparring session, every bear wrestling video that later became a viral sensation was just another step toward the warrior he was destined to become. His rise through the MMA ranks was methodical, quiet, and devastating. Fight by fight, he dismantled his opponents with an unrelenting style that left no room for doubt. Yet, through it all, Khabib remained grounded, never boasting, never seeking the spotlight, always letting his actions do the talking. Conor McGregor's story couldn't have been more different. Growing up in Dublin, Ireland, Conor's life was marked by chaos and rebellion. Before the fame, he was a young man with big dreams and little direction, living on welfare and barely making ends meet. What set him apart, even in those early days, was an unshakable belief in himself. Conor's introduction to combat sports began with boxing, but it was MMA that truly ignited his passion. He saw the sport not just as a way to compete, but as a stage to showcase his charisma, wit, and relentless drive. As he climbed the ranks of cage warriors and eventually earned his UFC contract, Conor understood something many fighters didn't: fighting was only part of the battle. Selling the fight was just as important. His sharp tongue and larger-than-life personality made him an instant star. Fans flocked to him, not just for his knockout power, but for the way he could verbally dismantle his opponents before ever stepping into the cage. When these two forces first collided, it wasn't inside the octagon. It was in the shadows, in the build-up, in the simmering tensions that started long before fists were thrown. Conor, fresh off becoming the UFC's first simultaneous two-division champion, had already ascended to the peak of the sport. Khabib, meanwhile, was quietly climbing the lightweight division, dismantling every opponent in his path, with a style that was as suffocating as it was effective. It was inevitable that their paths would cross, but the rivalry truly ignited when Khabib confronted Conor's teammate, Artem Lobov, in a hotel lobby. What should have been a minor confrontation spiraled out of control when Conor and his entourage arrived days later, attacking the bus, carrying Khabib and other fighters. The incident wasn't just a PR nightmare for the UFC, it was a declaration of war. What made this rivalry so unique wasn't just the clash of fighting styles, Conor's striking precision against Khabib's grappling dominance. It was the deeper layers of animosity that went beyond competition. Conor's verbal assaults targeted not just Khabib, but his family, his religion, and his homeland. It wasn't just trash talk, it was deeply personal, cutting into the core of who Khabib was. For Conor, it was business as usual, a way to get under his opponent's skin and sell the fight. But for Khabib, this was an attack on his values, his honor, and everything he had been taught to defend. The tension reached a boiling point when, during the UFC 229 press conference, Khabib sat silently as Conor unleashed a tirade of insults and accusations. For every word Conor threw his way, Khabib's silence seemed to scream louder. He wasn't interested in winning the war of words. He was waiting for the moment he could settle it, the only way he knew how inside the cage. But while the main narrative centered on Khabib and Conor, the ripple effects of their rivalry spread far and wide. Fans were drawn into the drama, taking sides with a passion that bordered on tribalism. Entire nations backed their fighters, with Ireland rallying behind Conor and Russia, and much of the Muslim world standing firmly in Khabib's corner. Teammates, trainers, and even other fighters were pulled into the fray, adding new layers of complexity to an already volatile situation. It wasn't just a fight anymore, it was a cultural phenomenon, a clash of ideologies that transcended sport. As fight night approached, the stakes became even clearer. For Conor, this was a chance to reclaim the lightweight title and remind the world why he was the biggest star in MMA. For Khabib, it was an opportunity to defend not just his belt, but his legacy, his honor, and everything he represented. The fight was no longer about rankings or records, it was personal. And everyone watching knew that whatever happened in the octagon, the story was far from over. When the cage door finally closed and the first round began, the atmosphere was unlike anything the sport had ever seen. The fight was as much a psychological battle as a physical one, with both men testing each other's limits in ways that went beyond technique. Khabib's relentless pressure and ground control quickly became apparent, but Conor's resolve and striking ability kept him in the fight. Every exchange felt like it carried the weight of the entire world, with millions of fans holding their breath at every move. But as Khabib secured the submission in the fourth round, the story took a turn no one could have predicted. The post-fight chaos, with Khabib leaping into the crowd and Conor's corner retaliating, blurred the line between sport and spectacle. It wasn't just about the fight anymore, it was about everything that had led to that moment, everything that had boiled over into one of the most infamous scenes in UFC history. And yet, even after the dust settled, the rivalry felt unfinished, the questions still lingering. Was this truly the end of their feud, or just the beginning of something even bigger? The answer, it seemed, wasn't in the cage that night. It was in the unresolved tensions, the unanswered challenges, and the lingering echoes of a rivalry that refused to fade. And for the fans, one question remained: was this rivalry ever about a fight, or was it always destined to be something more? As the chaos of UFC 229's aftermath settled, the world was left buzzing with speculation, accusations, and a lingering sense that the story was far from over. Khabib's leap over the cage and the resulting melee were etched into the annals of MMA history, not just as a moment of pure pandemonium, but as a declaration that the rivalry between him and Conor had transcended the octagon. For the UFC, it was both a PR nightmare and a goldmine, a reminder of how deeply personal rivalries could captivate a global audience. But for Khabib and Conor, it was more than headlines and pay-per-view numbers. The fight had settled one chapter, but in its wake, new challenges and deeper tensions emerged. For Khabib, victory didn't bring peace. While he returned to Dagestan a hero, celebrated by his people and the broader MMA world for his dominance, the fallout from that night cast a long shadow. The Nevada State Athletic Commission handed down fines and suspensions, and public scrutiny of his actions intensified. Yet Khabib, ever composed, remained unapologetic. To him, the post-fight brawl wasn't just a moment of lost control. It was a defense of his values, a response to months of provocation that had attacked the core of who he was. Still, as he spoke to the media in the months that followed, it became clear that victory hadn't fully satisfied him. Conor's words and actions lingered like an open wound, and the feud's toxic energy hadn't been extinguished. For Khabib, respect wasn't just earned in the cage, it was lived outside of it. And in his eyes, the story wasn't finished until the lessons he sought to teach were fully understood. Conor, on the other hand, retreated into the shadows, but not quietly. For a fighter who had built his career on relentless self-promotion and the image of invincibility, the loss to Khabib was a brutal blow. But Conor was never one to sit idly by. Even in defeat, he knew how to stay in the headlines, crafting narratives that kept his name relevant. Through cryptic social media posts, subtle jabs at Khabib, and claims of wanting a rematch, Conor kept the embers of their rivalry burning. Yet behind the bravado, there were signs of a deeper struggle. For all his showmanship, the loss had exposed cracks in the foundation of his mystique. Fans questioned whether Conor's hunger for fighting had been replaced by his pursuits outside the cage whiskey brands, business ventures, and a life of luxury that seemed worlds away from the hungry, scrappy fighter who had once clawed his way to the top. But Conor's resilience was his most underestimated trait. To the world, it looked like his fire might be fading. Behind closed doors, however, he was plotting something. And then, the unexpected twist. As the UFC continued to move forward, building new stars and promoting fresh matchups, whispers began to circulate. Khabib, fresh off another dominant title defense against Dustin Poirier, made cryptic comments in interviews about unfinished business. "Some things," he said in his usual calm demeanor, "are bigger than belts." At first, it seemed like a generic statement, perhaps a nod to his father's wishes for him to retire undefeated or his growing focus on training fighters in Dagestan. But the rumors began to grow louder, talks of a potential rematch with Conor. UFC President Dana White fueled the speculation, hinting that the rivalry was too big to ignore, and that, given the right circumstances, the world might see Khabib and Conor face off again. The idea was polarizing. To some fans, it was the natural progression of their story, an opportunity for closure. To others, it was a distraction, a manufactured attempt to milk an already iconic rivalry for more. Yet, just as the world braced for the possibility of another clash, a new variable emerged. A fighter rising through the ranks of the lightweight division began to make waves, calling out both Khabib and Conor with a confidence that felt almost reckless. He was brash, unrelenting, and eerily reminiscent of a younger Conor. His presence added a layer of unpredictability to an already volatile narrative. Suddenly, the rivalry between Khabib and Conor wasn't just about the two of them, it was about a new generation stepping into the spotlight, eager to carve their own legacies at the expense of the two biggest names in the division. For the UFC, it was a perfect storm. For Khabib and Conor, it was a challenge they hadn't seen coming. As the tension built, both men seemed to retreat into their own worlds. Khabib, still grappling with the loss of his father and the weight of his responsibilities as a champion and role model, began to speak less about fighting and more about legacy. His words hinted at a desire to leave the sport on his terms, undefeated and untarnished. But for every interview that suggested he was ready to walk away, there were moments that hinted at the fire still burning within him. For Conor, the stakes couldn't have been higher. His return to the cage had been met with mixed results, and critics questioned whether he could ever reclaim the form that had once made him unstoppable. But as the pressure mounted, so did his determination. He began training with a focus and intensity that hadn't been seen in years, sparking rumors that he was preparing for something monumental. What no one expected, however, was the sudden shift in dynamics that came next. In a surprise announcement, the UFC revealed that both Khabib and Conor would be in attendance at an upcoming event, an event that, on the surface, had nothing to do with them. The speculation was immediate. Would there be a confrontation? A face-off? Or was this simply a calculated move by the UFC to reignite interest in their rivalry? As the date approached, the anticipation reached a fever pitch, with fans and media alike waiting to see what would happen when the two most polarizing figures in MMA shared the same arena once more. What unfolded that night was unexpected, a moment that left the world stunned, and the rivalry's future shrouded in uncertainty. But that's a story for the next chapter. For now, one thing is clear: the stakes have never been higher, the players have never been more determined, and the world is once again holding its breath. The question isn't whether Khabib and Conor's story is finished, it's what comes next. As the lights dimmed in the sold-out arena, the tension was palpable. Fans roared in anticipation, their chants echoing through the venue as cameras panned across the crowd. Conor McGregor sat in one section, exuding his usual swagger, sunglasses shielding his eyes as he leaned back in his seat, soaking in the moment. Across the arena, Khabib Nurmagomedov sat with his team, his expression as stoic as ever. The UFC had pulled off the unimaginable, bringing these two polarizing figures together under one roof again. But the night's true spectacle wasn't the fighters in the audience, it was the new blood in the octagon. A rising lightweight contender, now the talk of the division, had called out both men in a fiery lead-up to his fight, claiming it was time to put the legends to rest and take his place at the top. The fight began with explosive energy, the young challenger putting on a performance that captivated everyone in attendance. His speed, power, and aggression were undeniable, and the crowd couldn't look away. As the bout unfolded, the cameras occasionally cut to Khabib and Conor, capturing their reactions. Khabib watched with the analytical precision of a veteran, his eyes tracking every move as if dissecting the fight for weaknesses. Conor, on the other hand, was visibly animated, gesturing, laughing, and occasionally shouting advice, playing up to the crowd. The dynamic between the two was electric, a reminder that while the focus might have shifted to the new generation, the shadow of their rivalry still loomed large. When the fight ended in a dramatic knockout, the arena erupted. The challenger grabbed the mic in the post-fight interview and delivered a scathing speech that shook the MMA world. He declared himself the new king of the division and called out both Khabib and Conor by name, demanding they either step up or step aside. The crowd's reaction was deafening, a mixture of cheers, boos, and sheer disbelief. It was the ultimate provocation, and for a moment, the focus wasn't on the challenger, it was on how Khabib and Conor would respond. The cameras lingered on the two legends, and while neither man said a word, the intensity in their eyes spoke volumes. Something was brewing, and the world could feel it. What happened next took everyone by surprise. As the event wound down and the fighters exited the arena, Khabib and Conor found themselves backstage, face to face for the first time since their infamous clash. Security hovered nearby, tension thick in the air, as the two men locked eyes. But instead of the verbal jabs and explosive tempers everyone expected, there was silence. Conor broke it first, his voice low and uncharacteristically serious. "You know it's not over," he said, the bravado stripped away. Khabib nodded, his response measured. It was never about ending. It was about understanding. The exchange was brief, cryptic, and left everyone guessing. Rumors began swirling immediately. Was this a setup for a rematch? A reconciliation? Or something entirely different? The UFC wasted no time capitalizing on the moment, releasing footage of the backstage encounter that sent social media into a frenzy. Fans dissected every word, every gesture, trying to decipher what it all meant. And then came the bombshell, an official announcement that Khabib and Conor would be part of a special press conference, not to promote a fight, but to address the future of the lightweight division. It was an unprecedented move, one that left the MMA world in a state of suspense. When the day of the press conference arrived, the energy was unlike anything the sport had seen. Khabib and Conor took the stage together, their demeanor a stark contrast to their previous interactions. There was tension, yes, but also a surprising air of mutual respect. Khabib spoke first, his tone calm but firm. He acknowledged the rivalry, the animosity, and the chaos that had defined their relationship, but he also emphasized the importance of looking forward. "Fighting is not just about winning," he said. "It's about legacy, about what you leave behind for the next generation." Conor, in a rare moment of humility, echoed the sentiment. He admitted to his mistakes, the lines he had crossed, and the role he played in escalating their feud. "We gave the world a show," he said, his signature smirk returning for a brief moment. "But maybe it's time to give it something more." Then came the twist no one expected, the announcement of a joint initiative to mentor and train the next generation of fighters. The program would focus on bringing young athletes from different backgrounds and cultures together, using the sport to bridge divides rather than fuel them. It was a move that left fans stunned, a complete departure from the bitter rivalry that had once defined them. But even as the press conference ended on a hopeful note, the underlying tension remained. The question of whether Khabib and Conor would ever face off again lingered in the air, unspoken but undeniable. As they shook hands and left the stage, the world was left wondering if this was truly the end of their story or just the beginning of a new chapter. Whatever the answer, one thing was clear. The rivalry between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Conor McGregor had transcended the cage, leaving an indelible mark on the sport and the millions who followed it. And in its wake, the future of MMA seemed brighter, more uncertain, and more exciting than ever.